Welcome back to Wargaming World and to the men who would be kings. We're back in 1879 and we have our British forces at Rorke's Drift, and it's just an early morning stroll with a herd of cattle. They suspect nothing of any danger and are surprised to find a Zulu warrior force waiting for them, and we're going to play this game to see how things progress. So the way we're going to approach this is that this set of rules is new to us, so we'll work through the game through how the turn sequences work and how the rules play out. So it's going to be a relatively simple game, but hopefully for those who haven't played this game beforehand and those who are starting to play solo wargaming with the current circumstances, this might be useful. Before trying to play the war game, I thought it would be an idea just to do a bit of research, just to get some books together, make sure we're actually on form in terms of understanding what's gone on, etc. And that even included a manual of the period, just to make sure that we're going about things by the book. Okay, as might well be the case for lots of people, we're trying to make the best out of a difficult circumstance in terms of the war games table. The one we've got here is 6 foot by 3 foot. Therefore, what we're going to do with the particular game itself, which is normally in feet and inches, we're going to do it in centimetres. So that won't make a great deal of difference in terms of the outcome of the game, but it's just how we understand how we're playing it and how that's slightly different from the book itself. If you've played the Men Who Would Be Kings rulebook beforehand, you'll know that as I say, is feet and inches. And as we go across the table here from left to right, we've gone from Rorke's Drift to across to the end of the table, which is this river and an area of woods, which is where the Zulu forces will be coming from. Okay, just before we start, this is just a mock-up of how the game will play, but just to try and show you that in the center of the board here is our Zulu force advancing from the wooded area. So if you'll know your history, then you'll know about the Zulu tactic in terms of the buffalo. This will be the head and chest of the Zulu attack in the center, and we look to try and see if we can introduce the horns later in the game as we go through and attacking from these hills on the left hand side and from these hills on the right hand side. So I'll have to set the rules in such a way that it can incorporate that dynamic. In the centre we have the British, so we have our British forces under Chard and Bromhead, and we then have our Natal native contingent who've brought cattle out for a normal walk and to get it into a decent grazing area, which is what's represented here. Right, okay, so the next thing to do is to take a look at the forces. The very first thing we could have a look at in the Men Who Would Be Kings is the format of the forces. So on page 7 of the book, it gives us something really very simple. Both forces will have 24 points, and you'll be able to sort those between regular, irregular, tribal and crude weapons. Now, when it talks about 6 points for a regular force, actually that is for 12 figures, and for a tribal unit it's of 16 figures for 3 points. So the first British unit under Chard is one which is a regular infantry, which is a sharpshooter, and are also elite. The forces under Bromhead again are sharpshooters and are elite, and both units will be 9 points. The third unit is a tribal force, but it's the Natal native contingent under Ardendorf, and this unit will be fierce fighters. Finally, this final unit is an unenthusiastic unit. Really, their task is to take out the cattle. Both tribal units will be 12 figures rather than 16 just for this game. Right, I'll go into a little bit of detail about the leaders and the names of the regiments in a moment. But just to look at the points value, this is going to be the left horn for the Zulus. And they're fierce fighters. It's a married regiment, and they have 4 points. In the centre, this is our main attacking force. These are 3 units, one of which is an elite force as well as a fierce fighter, which will be 6 points. The 2 units behind are both veterans, so they will be 5 each. They're the force that's going to be coming out of the woods. And finally, this is the right horn, an unmarried regiment, fierce fighters, and they will be 4 points. The left horn is a married regiment. It's the Umbanambi, led by Kamafita. The right horn is an unmarried regiment, and it's the Ngoba Makosi. It's led by Koza. The centre are 3 units of the Ndlondlo. The leaders are Mpanda of Kantati and of the elite regiment Umbalini. Right, the men who would be kings really focuses on leaders, and the leaders have 2 roles. We've got our leadership value, so that'll be the first dice that we roll. And the first roll is then combined with a second roll, which has a lot of traits which will impact the game as we go. So I'm going to roll for each one. We know that the Zulus have got 5 leaders and the British have 4 in total. So let's work through them as quickly as we can. Okay, so I'm going to use the Wargaming World dice for rolling out the leadership. So therefore we're going to use for the first dice, for all leaders, is going to be the white dice. And then we're going to have red dice for the British, we're going to have blue for the Natal Native contingents, and green for the Zulus. So first of all, charred. We get a 6 and a 2. Okay, for the leadership results, Chard has a leadership of 5+, and his trait is that although he may be balding, he is not affected by the sun as long as he's wearing a helmet. Ardendorf, 3 and a 6. Ardendorf's leadership is 6+, however, he's a shirker, and he's all for self-protection. He'll make sure that his troops will not attack or fire unless they are attacked or shot at first. Bromhead, 5 and a 3. Bromhead, his leadership is 5+, and for his trait he's a damn fine fellow. Nothing more, nothing less. And finally our cattle train leader, a 3 and a 6. For the cattle train leader, his leadership is 6+, but he also is a shirker, and he will not attack or fire on units unless they're attacked first. Kamafita, 6 and 2. Traits for the Zulus, Kamafita, leadership is 5+, and also bald, but that makes no impact. Koza, we get a 2 and a 3. Koza has leadership of 7+. Unfortunately, he's a bag of nerves, and the first time his unit is under fire, we need to make a test to see whether he deserts. Next we have Mpanda, 3 and a 1. Mpanda has got a leadership of 6+. Unfortunately, when he makes decisions, if we roll a 1, it's a really poor decision, and it's the British player who'll choose what exactly happens. Cantati, 2 and a 3. Cantita, the leadership here is 7+. It's also a bag of nerves, and will also test the first time they come under fire or whether they engage. And finally Umbalini, 1 and a 4. And Umbalini with a leadership of 7+. Unfortunately, he's a little wheezy after far too much gin, and it means his unit can never move at the double. Okay, let's understand about winning and losing the game. The British have advanced, and have brought their cattle for some grazing early in the morning and are attacked by the Zulus. You can see by the map that it'll show that the Zulus are looking to try and encircle the British. So the game is really quite simple. If the British can retreat back to Rorke's Drift with the cattle, then that's a win. If the Zulus are able to wipe the British out, then quite simply it's a Zulu victory. If the British retreat but the Zulus capture the cattle, then we call it an honourable draw. Right, let's just understand some distances. The British need to retreat back to Rorke's Drift, so I've put a convenient red line of troops here where this is 60 centimetres and the regular distance in movement is 6 inches for the British. So in theory it would be 10 turns that it would take them to get back to Rorke's Drift for victory. However, there's one challenge for the British, and it's that the cattle they don't really take orders and tend to drift slightly further than that. So they're obliged to move further on alongside with that. So what we will do is, beyond this 60 centimetre line, we're going to roll 6d6 and see how many further centimetres further forward that the British have to go alongside with the Natal native contingent. A further specific is that along with the 6d6, we'll also look at the direction that the cattle go to, because they might move left, centre or right. The only specific that we do know is that none of the forces can pass this road. Therefore, if the cattle stray to the right hand side, they can be forced back, and that's obviously to the advantage of the British because we're not going further away from Rorke's Drift. Firing distances is key, so we have our red line here for the British, and if the Zulus are at that level, that is 24 centimetres where the Zulus are at the moment, and that is the maximum distance in terms of how far the British can fire. One final measurement is that the outflanking Zulus will take, if they move at the double all the way along, is that they could outflank and get onto these hills in 5 turns, but we don't know exactly how quickly they can move, so therefore as of turn 6 we'll start rolling, and on a 6 they can come onto the board, and then it'll be 6, 5, 4, etc. each turn. The Zulus can never enter the board on a 1. One of the great features of this rule set is that it allows you to do it with your own little tweaks and additions, and we're going to have a couple for this now. One will be is that when the British move, they roll 1d6 and they can only use that amount of orders. So if we roll 3, we can only use 3 orders for the 4 units that we've got. And one of the rules is, in addition, we must always move the cattle where possible. So therefore, essentially, we need to move that as a priority. The additional rule is that we have the fact that also, if you roll a 6 at the end of a turn, you can have a turn again. So where it's like a double phase of a game, we'll add that into the game as well, and you'll see how that works as we go. Okay, so let's have a look and see how far forward the cattle have strayed. So that gives us another 9, 12, 18 centimetres further forward. And let's see whether we go left, centre or right. 1, 2 is left, 3, 4 centre, 5, 6 is right. So it's to the right, so I suspect it's up to the edge of the road. So that's where the game's going to start. And there we have it. The British are set up, the cattle are grazing, everything is fine. British in position, looking down both sides of the road, expecting the rest of the forces to be fine under Lord Chelmsford, and nothing is anything untoward until this happens. Right, first phase of the game. So the Zulus can use 3 units on the first turn. Right, we see that there's 2 Zulu units that have come out from the woods, approaching the Natal native contingent and the left flank of the British. We next need to see whether the Zulus have a repeat phase. Let's see if we get a 6. No, we don't, so it's the British turn. Okay, if we remember, the British must use one of these dice to start moving the cattle back towards Rorke's Drift. So how many units? We can use 3. Okay, with the first move, the cattle are withdrawn. We don't need to take a test on that because travel infantry can move without a test. However, the second order is going to be with Bromhead, and we do need to take a test whether they can move to face the oncoming Zulus. Now, if you remember, Bromhead's leadership is 5. We also get a +1 because of it's a regular infantry, so we need to get 4 or more to move, and we can. So Bromhead has successfully wheeled to face the Zulus just out of range. I'm going to try and do the same thing with Chard on the right hand side. Chard, we need a 5, and he's successful. And finally, let's just see if it's a repeat phase for the British. No, it's not, so that's the end of turn 1. Turn 2 for the Zulus. And only 1 order. Well, that was a really disappointing roll, and so it just sees the elite unit attacking 1 move further forward. However, let's see whether the Zulus have a repeat phase. We need a 6 here. And no, it's only a 2, so it's a British turn. It's a good roll for the British, so we have all 4 units can move. Well, the British got 6 with the dice, so it means we can use all our units. So the cattle are withdrawn again, and in terms of Bromhead, this unit has moved into close order, which allows them to fire volley fire next time round. With Ardmendorf's troops, if you remember, the leadership meant that they're not going to attack, but I also don't think that they withdraw. They're fierce fighters after all, and they'll hold their ground as the Zulu advance. And finally, we have Chard, who'll want to move his troops again further forward towards the Zulus, but we need to take a test. Need a 5 for the test, and successful again. Now let's see whether the British have a double phase. No, they don't, so that's the end of turn 2. Turn 3, let's see how many Zulu units can move. 2. Now this is a really important part of the game where we have the Zulus with 2 units can move. We could have Mbelini moving at the double to hit the Natal native contingent. However, if you remember his trait, too much alcohol has meant that he can't move at the double, so we can just move 8 centimetres. Now let's see if this unit can avoid volley fire by seeing if these Zulus have a repeat phase. Need to roll a 6, and it's a 1. So it's a British phase. Okay, so it's the British turn, and the British need anything but a 1 here, because if it's a 1, they just need to move the cattle. They need anything more in order to be able to fire, and they can with a 3. Before we do some volley fire with Bromhead, we'll see if Chard can move once again. And that's 10, so yes, he can. Right, I was looking originally to fire volley fire from the British at the nearest Zulus, but you'll see from that line, actually they're not in the right position, so it'll just be a standard long range. So we've got 9 figures, so it'll be 9 dice. Originally we'll be needing 5s, but if you remember, these have been upgraded to sharpshooters, so it's 4s. Okay, 5s to hit, and that just looks like 2 hits. Okay, so 2 casualties. At long range is just 1 model. However, we need to double check that it's not the leader, and the only way that's going to be is if I roll a double 1. And that's not, so we'll remove that figure. The Zulu unit has taken a casualty, so therefore it needs to take a pinned test. So that's 2 dice, and we need an 8 and we failed to get that. The leader has a leadership of 7, and by taking 1 casualty, he would need to have got an 8, so we need to have a look at the consequences. Right, well that's bad news, because failing means that they will now be pinned, and it means in the next turn what we'll need to do is to rally the unit. And we just need to see whether the British roll a 6. They don't, so that's the end of turn 3. Coming into turn 4 here, but just to highlight, one of the good things about the men who would be kings is that there is a really good solo play option, which is playing against Mr. Babbage, and that's what we're doing here. So there are a number of points which illustrate how they would suggest that the Zulus would play naturally, and that's what we're trying to play to here with all of the various different points. And this is why it's a particularly good game for solo players. So on with turn 4. Look at the Zulu command. 6, so they can use all their units, obviously not the ones off board at the moment, but the 3 units if they wish. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is to try and rally this unit. The leadership is 7, but because we've got 1 pin, it means we need an 8 or more, and we need to make sure we don't get 3, because if so it would rout. So let's see how we go on. And that's fine. So although it can't do anything else in this particular phase, it is rallied, so we remove all pin markers. Okay, so now all 3 the long, the low units are out from behind the woods, and 2 are attacking the Bromhead unit. The other, although they're now rallied, next turn may well be attacking the Natal native contingent. Just need to see whether the Zulus get a double turn. No, they don't. So it's the British turn on turn 4. The British units can move. Only 2 actions, one of which has to be the cattle. That's frustrating for the British, but we're going to fire, repeat fire again here, 9 figures firing onto this unit. Right, we actually only need 4s here. I've made a big error in the last phase because I only used it for a 5, but never mind, that's just one of those things. So 4s to hit. So much more effective this time, as we look like we've got 6 hits. Right, that's 3 figures removed. Let's just check if it's the leader. It's not a double 1, so no, it's not. We also need to see whether they are pinned as a result. Yes, they are. Finally, is it a repeat British phase? No, it isn't. So that's the end of turn 4. Okay, how many Zulu units can move on turn 5? Right, well, that's all of them. Right, let's test the leadership here. And let's have a look how we go. 10 passed the test again. Right, I think we're going to have our first melee because Koza is going to order an at the double charge into Bromhead's unit. We'll see if he passes with the command, and then we'll see how far they charge. Right, let's see if the unit will go at the double. Yes, it will. It's passed its command, and in terms of distance, we need to add an additional d6. We need anything other than a 1, and we've hit the British. To 2, that's fine. Right, so we've got some action. Just before we do the melee, you'll remember that in terms of this final leader and his unit, that we needed to take a test to see whether that move was going to be decided by the British. However, this is a free move, so the Zulus they don't need to test for movement. It's the same way as the British firing. So that unit has moved up further away from the woods. This one has rallied, and we have our melee to take place here. The way fighting's calculated in the men who would be kings is that all figures are used. So the British will have 9, the Zulus 13. And if you remember when we were looking at the figures themselves, the Zulus are fierce fighters, and therefore it will be a 4 to hit for the Zulus with 13 dice, The British, it will be 5. Zulus first, needing 4s. That gives us 7 hits. British need 5. And that's 3 hits. Let's quickly test whether the leaders were killed. First of all, our Zulu leader was not. And our British leader, very nearly, but no. So we have 7 casualties from the British and 3 from the Zulus. Definitely a Zulu victory. Okay, so Bromhead retreats, but we need to test a pin test. His leadership is 5. We've taken 7 casualties, so you would need to get a 12. However, they're elite forces, so you get a +2. So we need 10, 11, 12. Otherwise, the British are pinned. And they certainly are. Now let's see if the Zulus get a double phase and have a repeat. Do they get a 6? Yes, they do. It's the Zulu turn once more. So let's see how many turns they can have. It's still turn 5 and 2, so 2 units can engage. Okay, so we're going to attack again here, which means we need to pass a test, which will be 7. The leadership here is 7, and indeed the leadership is 7 again here to attack the Natal native contingent. So let's have a look first of all at the attack against Bromhead. That's a fail, so they can't attack. And neither can they attack here. So both of those actions have failed. So although they had a big advantage in having an additional turn, or an additional go in the same turn, actually that's come to nothing. Now it's the British turn in turn 5. So we have 3 units. 1 again has to be the cattle, and then we need 2 other units. Okay, we have 2 more commands. And with the left flank for the British collapsing, Chard and Ardendorf do the sensible thing and are going to withdraw back to the safety of Rorke's Drift. We don't need to test Ardendorf's men. They can move automatically, and that's fine. But Chard, we need 5 or more, and we get that, so both can withdraw. Now, is it a double British phase? No, it isn't. So we're across to turn 6. Now, if you remember, turn 6 is when the Zulus can outflank. So we need a 6. So let's see if they appear on the left-hand side. No, they don't. On the right-hand side, yes, they do. Let's see how many orders the Zulus can undertake. And it's only 2. Just before we start turn 6, just a reminder of the objectives. The British are under a great deal of threat now, because the Zulus have appeared on their right flank, and it might well be not only that they were able to engage the British to their advantage, but also some extra bonus with the cattle as well. Right, so the Zulus have 2 commands. We've already brought the right horn onto the table, and we can see how it's now beginning to outflank the British, and certainly Bromhead here, the left-hand side, it looks quite disastrous. So our 2 orders from the Zulus is to see if we can engage again here, and so we'll need to have a test of 7, and then we're going to just move these units further forward, and we're going to try and see if we can catch up with the British somewhere in the middle, and perhaps intercept them before they get to the safety of Rorke's Drift. We attack Bromhead is the first question. No, we can't. So again, that's frustrating for the Zulus, and the other will just be a normal move. So although we haven't been able to engage Bromhead, the Zulus really are just sweeping forward now. And let's just see whether they get a second go in turn 6. No, they don't, and we're over to the British. See if the British can move. Right, okay, so we could possibly rally Bromhead as well as move Chard and Ardendorf's troops, but we certainly need to continue to move the cattle back to Rorke's Drift. Now, first thing, can we rally Bromhead and his unit? He has a leadership of 5 and elite, so 3 should be good enough, and that's absolutely fine. so they're no longer pinned. Ardendorf will be able to move back no problem, but let's have a look and see whether Chard can move. No, he's stuck. Let's see whether we have a repeat phase for the British. No, we don't, so that's the end of turn 6. Turn 7, and does the left horn appear? We need 5 or 6s to see. No, it doesn't. How many Zulu units can move? Or only the one? We're going to try and fight again here. And we pass the test. Yes, we can. It looks a very one-sided affair. We've got 10 figures for the Zulus, just 2 for the British. The Zulus needing 4s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's the end of that unit. British needs 5s, and I'll just test whether that's the leader. See if the Zulus get a double phase. No, they don't. Now let's have a look and see how many British units we can move. 5, that's fine, so all 3 can move. Move Ardendorf and the cattle, no problem. I just need to make sure that Chard can also move. And that's fine. The cattle have moved, no problem at all, as have Ardendorf and his troops. And finally we've also moved Chard. So the critical thing as we move into turn 8 is, will the left horn appear to threaten Chard and his troops? Okay, so we're now on turn 8, and probably the most important point of the whole game. We want to see whether the left horn appear. It'll be a 4, 5 or 6 this time. And yes, they do. Okay, so it's turn 8. Let's see how many units the Zulus can actually move. Only 2. Moved 2 units. We have this unit moving further across the hill on the right side. And then we've also moved this unit further forward as well, trying to get close to the Natal native contingent, although there's still some distance. The Zulus have another turn. No, the British units can move. All 4, so that's fine. Again, the cattle, which is now very close to Rorke's, move without a problem. It's a free move, or free order I should say, as is the same case for Ardendorf, but we need to check whether Chard can move. Yes, he can. The British get a second phase. No, they don't. So that's the end of turn 8, and the question really is, can the left and right horn encircle the British? Such a point where they can get engaged and hold the British up for enough period of time so that the remaining Zulus can encircle them and cut them down. Right, turn 9, and let's start with the Zulus to see how many units they can use, and all of them. Okay, so the centre of the Zulus have advanced further forward, and the right horn, and further up here the left horn also advanced and are getting very close to the British line. The Zulus have a second go. No, they don't. How many British units can we have moving? 4, so all the units can move. For the British will be that the cattle and the trail unit will get towards Rorke's Drift. What I want to know is whether Chard can move, and he certainly can. Right, well, we really have the picture of the battle here. We can see that the cattle are getting towards Rorke's Drift, and that the 2 horns, the Zulus on the left and right, are closing in on the Natal native contingent and the British unit under Chard. What we want to know is whether that unit can actually punch through or hold the Zulus off and get back to see whether we might be able to get an honourable draw. One question is whether the British have a multiple phase. No, they don't. Okay, it's turn 10. We're going to come really more or less towards the conclusion of the game here, I think. Let's see how the Zulus go on. Everybody can move again in turn 10. Right, we had a 5, so therefore the units here, the 3 units from the long below, if I pronounced that even anywhere near correctly, they've moved through the centre. They're not really going to be engaged in the game here because, well, depending on how we go, but we've got the units on the left and the right wing. Now this one, simply because of the way the table's set up, I've had to move them down. They were 20 centimetres apart from Chard's unit at the top of the hill there. So I've moved them 8 centimetres, so they should be 12 centimetres away, which means this unit could fire at them in short range. Before we check the British, we need to see if the Zulus have a double phase, which they don't. The British now, for their part of turn 10, is to see whether they can get a decent move, and they can use all of their units, which means for one thing that the cattle, all of it returned back to Rorke's Drift. Ardendorf's unit moves at the same pace as the Zulus, so it is in quite good distance from each unit, unless this particular unit charges at the double and gets a good roll next time round. However, we're going to concentrate on the British here because they aren't going to move. They're going to fire at short range at this unit, which is 12 centimetres away. So this unit doesn't need to test to fire. It's an automatic capability for the British, so it's a free action. So we need 4s. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, it's 6 hits. Right, that's 6 kills. We just need to test whether it's actually Kamafita, the leader. No, it isn't. So that's 6 killed, and we need to test for pin. The British get a double phase. Yes, they do. And so how many units can move? 4. Well, we've already got the cattle back to Rorke's Drift, so that's both Ardendorf, and we'll see what Chard's unit will do. Ardendorf's unit has moved, but hasn't gone all the way straight to Rorke's Drift. It's turned to face the Zulu unit here, offering a screen also to Chard, whose unit will fire once again here. Chard's unit firing once again, needing 4s. It gives us 1, 2, 3, 4 casualties. Check if it's the leader. No, it's not. Okay, it's turn 11. We seem to have a big advantage for the Zulus, and then suddenly, through one set of fire from the British, everything seems to have turned on its head. The Zulus won't give it up quite that easily, so let's see how many units can move in this turn. 2. Move this unit forward, and in addition, this unit has moved off the hill and is preparing to attack the Natal native contingent. Do the Zulus get a second go in this turn? No, they don't. The British units, both of them. Chard's going to fire for the 3rd time with his unit, and that means that group, that unit from the left horn, have been wiped out. Well, it's the first time really the British have fired in anger, and it's just seemed so effective. So, as long as the British aren't engaged in close combat, then they seem fairly invincible from that set of firing. British get another phase in that turn. No, they don't. So that's the end of turn 11. Right, turn 12. See how many units the Zulus can use is just 1, and therefore it's going to be the Gobo Mokosi here, and for Koza to see whether he can lead them into attack. That attack, he needs 7 or more on this roll, and 7 it is. Right, we've got this battle, and it's 13 figures each, and they are identical as fierce warriors. And let's see who comes out on top, needing 4s. Okay, so we need 4s. That's 5 for the Zulus. Right, Natal native contingent needing 4s. And that's at 7, so they've been successful. Just test the leader. No, it's not. And the leader again here. No, it isn't. Will the Zulus get a second phase in this turn? No, they won't. It's the British phase. Number of British units to, well, 3, so both units can act. See if Ardendorf can lead these Natal native contingent back into battle. No, that's a fail. Okay, and at that point I'm going to call a halt on the game. We've had 12 turns, and I think we're going to call it an honourable draw. There's been some heavy casualties on both sides, and the British, although they are going to retreat back to Rorke's Drift, they're going to do so without an officer, and I suspect a little later when there's a heavier engagement, that might well cost them dearly. In terms of the rules, it's been a good game just to try out the men who would be kings. I've used a relatively small skirmish just to show how the game is played. For the solo games with Mr. Babbage, it's a really good game, it's good to use. It's a bit limited with the table size that I have, but it's worked fine with centimetres, I think. And it would be good also, I think, to use this game with more forces, maybe 4 or 5 firing units from the British, and maybe 7 or 8 Zulu units. We'll have to see and try that again. But in total, I think that's it's a good rule set to use. So finally, I just want to say thanks very much for everybody who's watched the video. Really appreciate that, and it would be great if you subscribed to the YouTube channel of Wargaming World. And finally, and most importantly, I'd like to thank my daughter for doing all of the filming, the editing, and really making it a great game to play and be involved with both of us doing it. So thanks very much. Thanks again for watching.